faithful yesterday. The Bible isn't just something. This year we have been pushing the Bible more than ever before. We've been talking about the Bible in 1 year. If you're on our Facebook group and a messenger, you'll see that I send out this message often. Lately, I'm encouraging and I'm catching up and saying, how are you doing? Where are you at in the plan? And it's because we're getting ready to go into it next year, and we've already got plans starting January 1st to be able to continue on with what God has in the Bible. But the Bible's not just something that we say, well, as a Christian, this is what I'm supposed to do, but this is our lifeline. This is our hope. This is our greatest weapon, and it reminds us of who God is. From Genesis, the very first book, to Revelation, the very last. The Bible is God's letter introducing us to who He is. And who He is faithful. The book of Genesis opens up the Bible with the creation of the world, and we meet the first man and woman named Adam and Eve, from which all the Jewish people would come. As we follow through their history and we get into the world, we come to a man named Abraham. Now, Abraham lived so early in creation that the people were still learning, how do we follow God? Right? God had created the Garden of Eden. That's where Adam and Eve were, and they walked with God, and so they could learn from God how to be in relationship. But when sin entered the world, it created separation between man and God. And so now God no longer could walk side by side with us like He intended. And so the world was learning, how do we now walk in relationship with God? Because that's how we're created. Right? That's why the world is looking right now. They're looking wherever they can, and they're looking into witchcraft, and looking into all these different things. Go ahead and bring me the other mic if you can. Looking into all these different things, and they're trying to figure out what's missing. And they're looking, and they're asking these questions. They were doing the same thing in the time of Abraham. Life was happening, life was going on, and they were trying to figure out, who is God? How do we follow Him? How do we walk in relationship? And God was revealing Himself to all of these people. He was revealing, this is who I am, and this is how you can walk with me. And so as they're learning how to walk with God, in one of the weirdest stories in the Bible, God asked Abraham to do something that God would never want, that God would never allow, and that God would ultimately, later on in the Bible, condemn and say, when people begin to do this on their own, He says, I never asked for that. I don't want that. He views it as wickedness. But in this moment, He asked Abraham, and He says, Abraham, I want you to physically sacrifice your one and only son, Isaac, on the altar. And God expected Abraham to obey. Abraham didn't know this isn't something God would really want. But Abraham had faith in who God was, that God, if this is a promise, you've given me my son, and if you take him, then I believe you'll give him back. You'll bring him back to life, whatever. And so Abraham had faith without knowing what was happening, that he needed to obey God. And this moment is foreshadowing for you and I what God would do through Jesus. That as Abraham is getting ready to sacrifice his son, God is asking this unreasonable request because He's going to use this moment to show Abraham who He was. God will use the darkest moments of your life to shine through and show you who He is. Those moments when everything's falling apart, those moments when you're questioning why things are going this way, you're questioning, is God even hearing you? Those are the moments that God will step in and show you who He is. It was in this moment that God introduced His name to Abraham. Right? When I'm back home, there's people there that don't know me, and all they have to do is they hear the name Fincher, and immediately they know because my dad's there and my grandpa's there, and they began to form a picture of who I'm going to be because of who they are. Right? In the same way, when you go out around here, right, you began to talk about who you're related to and who your family is. Because of who your family is, because that's your relation, then people make a correlation to that name. Oh, if this is who that is, and this is who this person is going to be. God was getting ready to introduce His name to Abraham. And when we knew His name, then Abraham was going to know who God was. Abraham and Isaac begin to climb this mountain. They begin to gather the stones. And Isaac's not a little boy at this point. Isaac's likely a teenager. This isn't Abraham forcing his son into this. This is his son trusting his father, trusting God that no matter what, they're in this together. So Isaac allows himself to be tied up and be placed on the altar. They've got the fire ready on the side. They've got the sticks loaded up. Isaac's loaded on the altar. And all of a sudden, Abraham goes to grab the knife. And in my mind, the way that I picture this is this is not an easy moment for Abraham. And so I picture him there stressing over this moment, trying to build himself up, trying to talk himself up in this moment. And then he finally does it. And he knows that once he grabs the knife, it's real. And so he's going to grab it and he's going to go because this is what he's got to do. And so he's building himself up for that moment. And finally he's there. He reaches out and he grabs the knife. He's ready. And before he can even begin to do anything, God stops him. Right? God's not going to let it get any farther than that because that was all needed to be able to teach that lesson, to be able to teach Abraham that point and step in this moment. God was making the point, no matter how dire, no matter how last minute, when we walk in obedience to God, when we walk in obedience to His Word, then we can rest assured that God is faithful, that He will provide. It was in this moment that God introduces Himself to Abraham as Jehovah Jireh. Jehovah, Yahweh, the Lord, Jireh provides. The Lord will provide. God shows Abraham, the world is learning who He is, and God says, this is who I am. I am the God who provides. No matter what you're going through, no matter what you're facing, no matter what stands against you, no matter how dark your moment, no matter what's coming up, I am the God who provides. I am the one who will take care of you. I am the one who will be your source. I am the one who will be your life, and I am faithful. He provided then, and no matter what you face today, He will still provide because that is who He was, who He is, and who He forever will be. We can go from Abraham to Moses, from Moses to Joshua, going to Hannah, the mother of Samuel, to David, to the Israelite people, all throughout the Old Testament. It is full of story after story of God's faithfulness, of God's deliverance, of God's provision, how time and time again He always came through. I'm not a big fan of those words, always and never, because sometimes we use them and we get in a fight with our spouse and you always do this or you never do this, and that's not true. They don't always or never do anything, but God always came through. Every single time. He never failed. And if He's never failed before, we have no reason to believe that this will be the one time when we need Him in our moment. This will be the one time He can't come through. He has shown Himself that He was faithful. And in our moments today, He will continue to be faithful. We go into the New Testament, all the individuals that Jesus met in their brokenness. The book of Acts, those who the disciples met and ministered and loved to. Every miracle and story in the Bible is recorded as a testament for you and I that God was faithful yesterday. And if He was faithful to all these people yesterday, He will be faithful to you today and forever. No matter what storms may come your way, no matter what weight you came bearing in today, no matter what season you've just gone through in life, no matter what unexpected bills, unexpected sickness, no matter what emergency, the car breaks down, when things happen with your family, your children, something happens to your pet, all of these things can catch us off guard. All of these things can build up where it's the small thing that seems to be the thing, like this is the one that's going to break me. These things can shake us. Yes, some may be more serious than others, but in all of these things, He is faithful. The Bible is God's character witness to the faithfulness of yesterday, and it is the testament that He will be faithful forever. As early as Genesis chapter 3, God declared and He made the promise that he was going to send a Messiah. In the middle of despair, in the middle of brokenness, when sin had entered the world, when separation from God was coming, when judgment was coming, while people saw despair, God said, this is what I see. I see a future of hope where I'm going to send my son. And all of a sudden, years begin to pass. People were living for hundreds of years at this point early on. Thousands of years begin to pass. And they're looking back and they're like, well, God's delivered a Messiah. He's promised a deliverer. And they go through Exodus. And they go through the book of Judges where they're back and forth between, we've got the promised land, but they weren't living in obedience to God. And so now another nation would come in and would put them under slavery. And they go through years of that. We make it to the time of Samuel and King David. And we see that all of a sudden peace begins to reign, that they begin to conquer everyone around them. And then we get into Solomon in the time of prosperity and peace until again they quit following God. And all of a sudden judgment is coming, and they're saying in the middle of all of this, well, there's still supposed to be a deliverer. There's still supposed to be a Messiah. There's still supposed to be until finally, in the perfect time, Jesus came right when he was needed, right in a time that would impact and change the world more than any other time. And Jesus comes sooner or later. Jesus came in the perfect time to change the world. God was faithful to his promise, though the years passed. But just as Jesus was promised in Genesis 3 to come, Jesus, while he was here, said, I am coming back. And here you and I stand 2,000 years later, and sometimes we ask that question, is he coming back? When is he coming back? What's going to happen? Did we miss it? What's going on? But just as God was faithful, that he said, I will send a Messiah, and Jesus came, as Jesus said that I will come again, no matter how long passes, we can rest assured that he is faithful, and he will come again. He came to the earth, he died for you and I, he was raised back to life, he returned to heaven, and is now waiting to return for you and I. After Jesus had returned into heaven, one of his disciples, John, had a vision of the return of Christ. He records it in Revelation. This is what John writes, first part of Revelation chapter 19, verse 11. I saw heaven standing open, and there before me was a white horse whose rider is called Faithful and True. As he was faithful before, faithful is who he always will be. Even as we wait for his return, we know that upon his return, the world will recognize him, the world will see him, and his name will be called Faithful and True. No matter what season of life you're facing right now, no matter if everything were to fall apart tomorrow, and everything you thought that you had figured out were to collapse in front of you, God was faithful to the people of the Bible yesterday. His future coming will have him known as faithful and true forever. And whatever stands before you now, he is faithful today. You and I get to sit in here for the third week in a brand new sanctuary. I was joking around with him last week because when we first opened the church after COVID, we were shut down for in-person services for a year. We closed in March, we opened in March, right? And we opened the church on Sunday. Kayla and I got married on Saturday, and that second Sunday we were gone, right? We were out of here. We opened the church, this brand new sanctuary after 2 years. We're back in here. We opened the church on Sunday. The next Sunday I'm gone again. So Kayla was giving me a hard time before I left. So I'm hoping that'll break the pattern because I don't want to have any more remodels or anything like that. But what a journey it's been over the last 2 years. He was faithful yesterday. The Bible promises he's going to be faithful tomorrow. But I want us to step back and look in our own lives. We're going to look at the church, and there's moments, and I can preach for 2 hours if you guys want to tell you all the things that God's done just for Kayla and I. But you can look back at your life and look at what God's done just in your lives as well in the last 2 years. But we're going to look together at what God has done in our church, because we talk about this. We're not just talking about it because it's God's faithfulness is in the Bible, and it's not just because I'm a pastor, but it's because I can stand here on the other side of God's faithfulness in my life and say, this is what we've seen God do for us. The faithfulness that we see of God in the Bible is who He is for us today. And I love our story now. I believe our story now is incredible. I don't want to do it again. I don't want to go through it again. I don't want to do another loop of it. But it's great to be on this side of it, looking back. And in your life, no matter what you're going through, no matter what your story is, no matter the ups and downs, I believe once you make it to the other side, it's going to be an incredible story. And I know it's not fun to be in the middle of the story sometimes. It's not fun to go through the journey. But let me promise you that He is faithful. If you will cling to Him, if you will hold to Him, He's going to see you through. And there's going to be something incredible on the other side of what God is doing in your life right now. Our story began Saturday, December 18th, 2021. Kayla and I were getting ready for our Christmas service. Supposed to be the next day. We were coming in, and Kayla was right over here in this corner. And she was walking through the rows, making sure that the chairs were straight, making sure things are in the chairs, making sure everything's where it's supposed to be. And as she walked through, she caught her foot under the carpet, and I was in that back corner, and she said, hey, there's something under the carpet over here. And as I came over, we could see going up and down from this point, up through to the middle of the sanctuary to the back, the carpet was lifted all the way. And so I made some phone calls trying to figure out what was going on, and I called our presbyter, who's one of the other pastors up here. He pastors up in Dulce, and he says, hey, he's like, this is a Pastor Mike question. Pastor Mike is over all the Assemblies churches in New Mexico. He's our denominational pastor, and he used to be a general contractor before he was a pastor. And so Pastor Rudy said, talk to him. This is construction related. He's going to know more than anyone else. And so we said the first step was to cut a tiny hole in our carpet. And frankly, I didn't want to cut a hole in our carpet. I was like, man, now we're going to have a hole in our carpet. But we did. And so I cut underneath one of the chairs, like as an inconspicuous spot as I could find. We cut a little triangle, and I found a little piece of metal in the shed, and I shoved it down this hole 17 inches. That summer when we had been building, we brought the house in, we brought in the decks. We had a 2-man auger trying to put in the post for the deck, that we could not get that 2-man auger to go down 16 inches. And this little piece of metal went 17 inches, and we knew we had a problem. So that Wednesday, Pastor Mike came out himself, rented a jackhammer himself, drove out from Albuquerque himself. We cut a line in the carpet. We peeled the carpet back. We peeled the carpet up. And we said, we're going to jackhammer out a little hole right where the concrete's the worst, because we're thinking this is a broken water line, because it happened so quickly and so suddenly, it wouldn't make sense otherwise. And so we said, it's got to be a broken water line under there. And so we're checking maps, we're looking for things. And so he comes out with the jackhammer, and we jackhammered a little hole over there, and maybe you remember it. And we had a 12 by 5 hole. This is 2 days before Christmas. And all of a sudden we have a hole in the middle of our sanctuary. But the problem was, we got the concrete out of the way, and there was no wet spots in the dirt. And so we're trying to figure out what's going on. And so we started to dig down a couple feet. And sometimes because the area out here is so dry, the water will go down before it begins to come up. It'll just soak it in. And so he said, all right, well, we've got Christmas coming up, and we got New Year's, and Kayla and I were going to be in and out for different things. And he said, all right, when you guys are gone, he said, just turn the water off. And he said, and then when you come back, turn it on. You can come and check the church a couple times a day. He says, once you see a wet spot, then let us know, and we'll know where the break is, and we'll be able to fix it right away. And so a couple of weeks begin to come and go. We're shutting off the water when we're gone. We're coming back. We're turning it on until all of a sudden the sensor on the well went out. And so all of a sudden we lost all water altogether. And Kayla and I, in the middle of everything else, lost water at our house because we're on the same well. And so now we're out on the deck shoveling snow, melting it in a pot on the stove just so we can try to, not smell, go to the bathroom, whatever we need to do, wash some dishes, cook, right? All these, and so it's like a little thing just adds stress onto everything else that's already happening. Insurance comes out, and insurance at this point told us they're not liable. They said this is a structural issue, and they said they weren't going to help. And we found ourselves facing this mountain. We had a church from Bernalillo come in. The guy does concrete. He came in and he said, unfortunately, he said, the only way to fix this is for everything to be redone. There was no way for us to just patch up that one area that was cracked, because he said the way that the concrete is set, if you patch this area, eventually the tension will spread to back there, and then that's going to break, and you can patch that one, then you're going to have to patch up here. He said the only way to do it right is everything has to come out from the stage to the front doors. And that's what led us on the journey that we've been in for the last 2 years. Just for that concrete, though, was going to be $16,000. That didn't include any cost of getting concrete out. That didn't include any cost of removing concrete off of the property. That didn't include any cost for labor, for help for them to come in and pour it, or anything for rebar in the ground. That was just the concrete itself. And that would have taken half of the money that the church had right there. We could have afforded to cover that concrete, and then we would have been with very little money left to be able to cover all the other bills, all the other things, and to have what we needed. But God began to do some incredible things. Many of you may remember because you've been a part, but we got to work. The reality is I've spent more hours in the last 2 years logged as a construction worker than I have as a pastor, doing all the different things we've been doing in here. But the problem with a remodel is you start something and then you find all the other problems. Right? And some of you guys have been in here where we're in the middle of something. We're like, what in the world were they thinking? We spent 3.5 months breaking out the concrete in here to get everything moved out. In the middle of that, we found out that our ductwork was collapsed, that the whole thing needed to be replaced. And by the time we replaced the ducts, our furnaces were from the 1960s. Thank you. I'm getting all choked up, everybody. It's emotional. But we did. We found our ductwork was collapsed. The whole ductwork system needed to be rerun. And so we began to ask the question, by the time we rerun our ductwork, what are we going to do? Do we trust that our furnaces, by the time we invest all this money in ductwork, that they're going to last? And the reality is we came to the conclusion that the whole thing needed to be done for it to be done correctly. The HVAC for our church cost $18,000. More than we could afford. More than just the concrete. And we found ourselves trying to ask these questions. How in the world are we going to do this? But this is what we knew needed to be done. There's no way we could cover it. We were doing our food sales. We were taking an offering that year, but beyond that, there's plumbing that needed correcting. We knew that the floor was going to need to be redone. There's going to be carpet and electrical work. Half of our windows in here, this one over here, had clear tape that was just holding a complete crack together. Right? The windows needed replaced. The front doors had gaps all the way around them. $2,500 for the windows. The doors, we thought, hey, we've got some. Those should be okay. And as we continued to do our part, God continued to show that He was faithful. And all of a sudden, Citizen Church from Albuquerque and a church from Roswell, New Mexico, Waymaker Church, stepped in, and between the two of them, they gave us $40,000. Both of those pastors are invited, and hopefully both of them will be here with us in just a few weeks on the 19th when we celebrate, because we want to invite them because they invested and believed in us. We did 6 or 7 food and yard sales between 2022 and 2023, raised close to $10,000. This year you stepped up in a never-before offering for our church. Just from us, we raised over $3,000 to come in as we invested in our church, as we invested, put in extra hours at work. It was incredible. God was providing. We were stepping up as a church like never before. We got new HVAC in October of last year, concrete in January of this year, new windows somewhere along the way. The end was supposed to be in sight. And as we got into May and We had people come out to put in those new doors. All of a sudden they put them in and said, hey, we're sorry, but we've got them in for now, but you're going to have somebody come out to look at them because we just can't get them to fit right. So then we had a gentleman come out. That's what he does for a living. He's a Christian man. He works with other churches and he installs storefronts for a living. And he comes out and he tries to put in the old ones. And he got to the end. He said the same thing. He's like, I've got them in there. But he's like, they're not going to work. He said because of the building, the concrete. He says things aren't plumb. He says the design of these doors. He said just with the age, he's like, I can anchor them in this concrete and I put as many anchors as you want in, but he said it's only going to be every few months. You're going to have somebody out here constantly adjusting them. And so all of a sudden we found ourselves facing an $8,000 mountain again on the other side of everything. We were supposed to be done. And trying to figure out, God, how are we going to do this one? Can the church cover it? I mean, you've been faithful, God, so we can cover it, and we're going to take a hit, but we'll be able to get things done. And all of a sudden, Pastor Steve Glendaniel gave me a call just to check in. Hey, how are you guys doing? How are things going? Out of the blue, and I was just sharing with him. I was open. I've got a close relationship. I was like, this is where we're at. I was like, this is our last thing. Like, this just happened. I said, I have no idea what we're going to do. And he was able to come through with money he had from during his time as missions. He's a pastor now, but he was saying there's money left from my time in missions that's meant for native churches and for ministry. He's like, let me see if I can get that released to you for your church. And instead of paying $8,300 for brand new doors, the church only had to face $500. God has been absolutely incredible. Last week, for the first time, I added up all the different things that this sanctuary has cost us. And right now, we are sitting on the other side of a $60,000 remodel for our sanctuary. Last week, the church had decided before I ever got up there, as a church, as of the end of September's finances, we do our finances every month as a church. As the end of September's finances, we had spent about $5,000 over what we had actually raised or had been given. That's $5,000 that we had covered for different things that we've done in our remodel. And I told them that when I got up there, I said, we're sitting on the other side of a $60,000 remodel. We've only spent about $5,000. As we got to the altar last week, I was praying with people. The altar was going on, and so the pastor eventually walked up on the stage, and I heard him announce behind me. And I came home last week with a $5,000 check for our church that their board had already approved. We're sitting on the other side of a pushing $70,000 remodel. And by the end of this, we've got a couple other things that I reached out and said, hey, this is what we've got. We've got a couple other things that we wanted. And I was talking to Pastor Mike, and he said, go for it. He said, do it. You guys have the money. God is, and we're going beyond what we ever dreamed of where we would be. We have no debt. We paid very little money for a brand new sanctuary. When I tell you that his name is faithful, it's not because I'm a pastor. It's not because it sounds good. It's because I'm sitting here with each of you, and we have seen the faithfulness of God in our own life. Who God is for us, who he is for me, is who he wants to be for you, because he is faithful. As he loves me, he loves you. I am not special. I am not chosen of God. I am not an elite. I'm not something special because I'm a pastor, so God's got to give me his favor. The one thing that we have done right in the last few years is that we have worked hard on our end, we have trusted God on his end, and we have walked in obedience. And when you do that, you will see the faithfulness of God. When you will put in the work on your part and trust God to do what only he can do, and you will live in obedience in the meantime, waiting on him, following Him, trusting Him, you will see the faithfulness of God in your life. You're going to face battles. You're going to face mountains. Jesus tells us, He says, if they came after me and persecuted me, He says they're going to do the same to you. He's letting us know following Him doesn't mean life is going to be rainbows and sunshine. There's going to be storms. There's going to be valleys. There's going to be hard times. But He is faithful in those moments. So often we want God to come and step into our storm and say, peace, be still. But God instead is inviting us in those moments to step out of the boat, to step into the storm, and to experience His faithfulness in the midst of it. Sometimes we want God to remove the storm, but God is trying to use that storm to show you, this is who I am. The last 3 years has been a total rebuilding and restoring of our church. I've been here at the church for 4 years now. I remember stepping in September, and I was in my own Bible reading at that time, and I remember reading through Ezra and Nehemiah, and God began to speak to me, restore, return, and rebuild. And dear goodness, if I would have only known how He literally meant that we were going to rebuild. But I remember asking God, why do I need to know? I'm not going to be there. But God just began to speak to me about the future of our church. I believe now we stand on the other side of the rebuild, and we're going to begin to see something new coming in 2024. In the last few years, we have seen individuals set free. We've seen people coming back to the church who have been gone and away for far too long. This year we're watching, and I may know more as a pastor than you being together, but as I stand, I can watch and see as there are individuals within our church who, by the end of this year, some of you are going to have gone through the Bible for the very first time. There's others that I'm watching, I can see the transformation in the last 2 and 3 years where something has shifted in you, where it's going from knowing about God in our heads and knowing about church and knowing about, but something has sifted into your heart, and all of a sudden your life is not the same. You're not the same as you were a couple years ago. And I see it. I'm proud of you. I see what God is doing. I see the changes you're making. I see that you're trying. Right now, we are a brand new church. But we're also a brand new people. Some of us may be different people that were in here 2 years ago. But spiritually within us, there's also been a shift that in the last 2 years, we are not who we were because He's faithful. And if God has brought us to here, then He'll bring us through tomorrow. No matter what situation you face today, no matter what storm you're facing, no matter what you are going through, no matter what doubts, no matter what questions you have, He is faithful. Stand with me this morning. This morning, this is what I want to do. I'm just going to come into agreement with you. So I don't know what you've got going on. I don't know what doubts, what questions, what battles you may be facing. But if today you need God to step in, it's all right if we're at the end of our rope. It's all right to not have answers. It's all right to be desperate. It's all right to ask questions. It's all right to doubt. Today I want to stand with you though in agreement. So we're just going to open the altars, and if you need prayer, you say, I just need God to step into this situation. I believe in Him. I know He's real. but right now, I need him to show me. If that's you this morning, we're just going to open the altars. We're just going to take a time of prayer. I believe that God is going to meet with us today. If you want prayer this morning, the altar's open.